Lovely.
Okay, we are on the morning break of the third day of questioning of Peter Francis, the undercover police officer who infiltrated anti-racist groups between 1993 and 97, targeting family justice campaigns and militant Labour. I'm joined with Lee. What have you made of what we've heard?
Absolutely fascinating and shocking. Shocking. The thing that's really stood out for me today is the routine surveillance on democratically elected individuals and publicly available information of lawful activities of political groups being routinely passed on to, I understand, special branch. I think that's where it was going.
I mean, so he was working for Special Branch, but what was also was that when we saw a cover note from the security services, this information was going much further, going to MI5. And key, the key thing, I guess, is that information was being used to update the registry files.
Yes.
So, and one of the things he pointed out was that so we've gone from his infiltration of Kingsway Anti-Fascist Group and his reporting on the Revolutionary Interventionist League, who's quite a small organisation, so him now being in a much larger militant Labour, the group that went on to become the Socialist Party, as we know it today. And he said this was his managers were pleased with this, and one of the reports, which was a report about a Marxist weekend school, and they were pleased with it because so many of the people he was reporting on already had registry files. And this was the key thing, that if you were adding to a registry file, that was particularly good work. One of the interesting ones, one of the things he reported on was an industrial dispute by, and you have to help me with this, the National Association of Further and Higher Education.
I think it was the National Association of Teachers in Further and Higher Education.
So he reports on their dispute. All very publicly known information about this dispute, and it's just an industrial dispute. But he said, they had a registry file opened on them in 1977, so therefore this was something to be reported on. But furthermore, if he came across anybody who was a member of that union, then he would open a registry file on them immediately. Normally, it would take 5 or 6 mentions to get a registry file, but if you're a member of that union, or any union that had registry file, then you got file immediately personally.
And given from my limited knowledge that union was a perfectly legitimate, properly constituted organisation acting democratically in a democratic society, and it had a file with, are you saying MI5? Is that,
that would have gone to MI5.
With MI5 since 1977, and any elected official would have had their name go straight to MI5 on first mention of coming into contact with an undercover police officer like Peter Francis. Absolutely shocking. And the other thing you've just mentioned is you said that Peter Francis has said today in his evidence that he was praised by his superiors for the report on the Marxist summer school or the Marxist weekend, whatever it was, because so many people he mentioned in it were already known to the secret services. So then it becomes self-perpetuating, doesn't it? The information on these individuals just builds and builds and builds and builds. And this is information pertaining to everyday political activity in a democratic society. It's sinister. It's sinister. That's what I felt today.
I mean, and there wasn't just 1 or 2 examples of it. When we saw reports from election results, I mean, and I like David Barr, KC, who was doing the questioning, the counsel for the inquiry, he was going through the report going, well, so this would be publicly reported, you know, the fact that the turnout, the fact that the militant Labour candidate who'd won was pleased. Well, that would have been self-evident.
Said it in there, they did a little speech.
You know, literally everything about this report was purely unknown. So why are you filing this report? And he was like, well, that was what my job was to do.
And this is the other side of deeply sinister and worrying behaviour in a democratic society by the police force. The other side to it is what a waste of resources. You know, that all of that money, time and effort was going into reporting things that was already publicly available, reporting information already publicly available. What else could the police, what crimes could the police have been solving if they'd focused their energy and efforts on fighting crime rather than reporting democratic activities?
What was interesting was one of the few things that maybe wasn't reported in the press about that particular councillor was the fact that he was homosexual. Apparently, he was openly gay, but it wasn't necessarily like in the media. But that was recorded. He was asked, "Why was this recorded?" He said, "Well, that was always recorded." I mean, we've heard already from Peter Francis. We mentioned it yesterday that if someone wasn't straight, then their sexuality would need to be recorded in as much detail as possible in the reports about them.
Yeah, and obviously I don't know quite as much as you around some of these things. I was surprised that in 1994 that type of particular aspect of somebody's, somebody was being reported. And I was trying to remember when we had all the issues around Section 28, when Thatcher was trying to bring in Section 28 to make it illegal, I think, to talk about homosexuality in schools. And I'm going to go away and check, well, when was that? Because clearly in the minds of Special Branch and in the MI5, being gay was something that you might be able to use against somebody, blackmail somebody with. And I'm assuming initially that's why they were asking for that to be reported on. And so it was just consistently without people within that system questioning it. Because I'm following orders. This is my job. This is what everybody does. So that's what I'll do because why would I not do it? Yeah, really, really worrying.
We were also taken to some reports about individuals. One of the reports about an individual was about someone who's been involved with the inquiry as a solicitor, Paul Heron, from the Public Interest Law Centre, who was, not only in the room, but also in shot when the actual, if anybody's watching the broadcast on YouTube, whilst the questions are being asked about him, he's literally sat behind David Barcasey as questions are being asked. In that report about him, it claims that he's violent. Now, I'm not being funny or anything, but I've got to know Paul Heron a little bit through over the last 10 years of the inquiry, and it's a ridiculous suggestion. No offense to Paul, but really, and when this is put to Peter Francis, really, was he violent? He's like, oh yes. When he's asked to explain an example of it, he has literally nothing. He talks about running with him on a canvassing against the BNP, some running towards, running away. But when it actually comes to actual physical violence, he has no examples. He can't cite a single example of it. Now, Peter Francis has explained that he has complex PTSD, that he has great difficulty remembering anything violent. Apparently, all these things merge into one for him. But it's a very significant thing to say that someone has a propensity to violence, which is what he's suggesting.
Well, it's a reflection, in my view, it's a reflection of how little training and how little thinking, consideration and ethics was brought into the running of this unit. Because quite clearly, if you put one word violent in a report, people are going to assume that means you have seen that person be physically violent. They routinely talk about being proactively violent against people that they don't like. So there's no evidence in the report to go along with the single word violent. I'm assuming they had no training on how they should write these reports, how they should provide evidence for the statements they're making. So there's one word there written in 1994. So we're going back 29 years. Is that? My maths isn't very good. And what you can make whatever you want out of that one word. And again, these reports are going to the secret services with no evidence attached to that descriptive, single descriptive word. So, again, the people's reputations, here is a solicitor sat in the room and that's being put up right out in public and it is on formal police reports.
And so much of what Peter Francis said about it, the terminology he used. He lent very heavily into what anti-fascist terminology about an exchange of ideas physically, and all these kind of things that people who are involved in anti-fascism would recognize as meaning there was a bit of fisticuffs. But his continued, he could look after himself, or that person was it's full of euphemism. It's when David Barr was like, "Did you see him punch someone?" He's like, "Oh well, no."
Yeah,
it's come on.
I'm a speech and language therapist by training, so I absolutely when I see anybody give evidence here, you do have to take into account that they're probably very nervous. It's a very demanding thing to give evidence, particularly day after day. and I don't know how much guidance people are given about how they should speak and what they should say. I would like things to be in plain English.
Yeah.
I think that should perhaps be the other, just in plain English, you know.
Yeah, that would be a great help. And I think it says something about the way the effect of the deployment on Peter Francis, that he's still using the terminology that he would have been using when he was in the away team.
Well, if you think of anybody in a system, I mean, even if you think of people who've been involved in left-wing politics for a very long time, if they then sit down and speak to somebody who's never been involved in those politics, there's a whole bunch of language and phrases and concepts that are taken for granted. So, and it's difficult to undo that. You know, it's difficult to undo that. And I would imagine as a whistleblower, somebody like Peter Francis has had very little support.
Yeah, I mean, that seems very evident. I find this fascinating, actually, this thing about language, but we are on a short break. So we should go back in. Just to say, before the break, this was an unscheduled break. I mean, it is the morning break, but there was a breach. We just started talking about the summer camp in Germany, Bavaria. Peter Francis was talking about how the summer camp was taking place in an area that had a high level of fascist activity within it. And there's been a lot made of the fact that his report suggests a very dangerous situation. A lot of people are going like, no, it was not. There was a lot of partying. It was a fun event. So yeah, we're going to go back in and hear about that. Just seeing if any of the once again, all the comments that we get on YouTube for these videos are absolute nonsense, so I'm not going to react to any of them. Thanks for joining us. We'll be doing another video at lunchtime. See you all then. Bye for now.